Okay, go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I really appreciate the celebration of Schiller's birthday and the wonderful music and the performances. Uh, Unfortunately, the world doesn't look as happy as the people in your room uh, and so optimistic. But I mean, I have to say, I'm gonna talk about three uh, themes: the current context of what's happening in Gaza and the region, including the timing of why Hamas launched their attack. This crisis did not start on October the 7th. As I will explain, we have to go at least back to 1916 and 1917 to understand the whole context, which I'm going to talk about, the long-term context. But I'm also going to talk about how to get out of this and all the ideas which were presented by Lyndon LaRouche, Helga LaRouche, and the Schiller Institute historically, but even now. Uh, we, as somebody said, we don't have a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. We have a crisis of humanity because of watching what's going on there, the suffering of the people, the collective punishment of the whole 2 million people squeezed into that small area, and looking at it with indifference, as we see in certain capitals in the United States, in Britain, in the EU generally, but also in other parts of the world, that it's really, it shows that our civilization is in a deep crisis, and there should be a radical shift if this does not grow into a major conflict. Israel is right now is trying to provoke Hezbollah to attack. The Hezbollah leaders recently in a speech, he was not provoked. He said, we are not gonna make a gonna counterattack. Iran is not being provoked into participating into this. The United States has mobilized lots of the Navy and Air Force to wage a regional war. That's the purpose. I mean, you don't need the nuclear submarines and aircraft carriers to attack this small part of in Gaza. But the intention is to have a wider conflict, which could lead to, as many people predict, to world war. Now, the real the context of what is happening now, we have to go back and look at what Lyndon LaRouche presented. I would like to share this is something which Lyndon LaRouche, the late American thinker and economist, presented already in 1995, actually, in a different form, predicting the transatlantic financial and banking system. And he has been fighting against this paradigm. We have two paradigms moving in the world today into opposite directions. One paradigm which started already in the 1960s, but most dramatically in the 1970s, is a countercultural revolution, but it has many aspects: economic, cultural, moral, and every aspect. And LaRouche predicted already that if we allow this new creation, which started in 1972 with the ending of the Bretton Woods system by President Nixon, LaRouche predicted that this would lead to not only physical economic collapse of the transatlantic area, but also into global fascist control. And Lyndon LaRouche presented this like we have had a paradigm shift, at least since the late 60s, whereby the economies of the United States, Britain, and Western Europe were moving farther and farther away from what made America and Europe great again after World War II by investing into infrastructure. We see in the blue line going down, the investments in infrastructure, education, healthcare, cultural activity in the classical sense have been going down for decades. While at the same time, financial speculation, where making money quick took over the whole financial and economic system and the thinking. And we have had an increase in the financial instrument being sold and bought by banks, financial firms, and individuals, including pension funds and others, to make quick money. And also the money printing, which is in the yellow, continued since then and has dramatically escalated. Lyndon LaRouche said this is unsustainable system and it's going to collapse. We don't know exactly when, but as we saw it happen in 2008 with the global financial crisis. This system finally disintegrated. It's kept on life support by printing even more money. And now we have trillions and trillions of dollars of, in debt, but also $2 quadrillion in outstanding financial paper, speculative paper, derivatives, which can collapse. And that would be the final stage of the disintegration of the whole system. So this is what has been leading into the militarization of the transatlantic system, with waging wars and imposing sanctions on nations, and leading the world into what we have seen. We have had many wars in Iraq, in Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Yemen, and so on and so forth. This is all a product of this disintegrating system, which is trying to keep itself, above the water by waging war. The only industry which is functioning in the United States is the arms industry right now. On the other hand, we have had a different paradigm taking shape in the world. You all remember this picture from March this year, where, as Tom was talking about, you had the Saudis and the Iranians being brought together by the Chinese, ending many, many years of proxy war between the so-called Shia alliance and the Sunni alliance, which has wreaked havoc in the region, but it's not really a Shia-Sunni conflict. It's an internationally orchestrated Anglo-American war in which those countries are just mere tools. Now, this paradigm, which is upward going, it's with China is leading that. China with the BRICS nations, with Russia, with Brazil, India, South Africa, and also with the Belt and Road Initiative, which is an enormous economic platform for joint development of the whole world, if everybody wants to join, but at least for the global majority, the global South. This has been a very important vehicle for economic development and also for peace. China is also leading initiatives, including in this conflict in Palestine and Gaza, to have an international conference for ending this conflict and going back to the idea of a two-state solution. So we have these two paradigms are now clashing, or like you have two tectonic plates which create, earthquakes. One is going up, one is going down, and that's why we have earthquakes. We have threat of war, a global war, starting either from Ukraine or from the so-called Middle East. The Middle East is a fake term. It was created by the British Empire. It's West Asia, we can say. But this is really the background to what is happening now. And we also, as part of the civilizational crisis we have right now, it's almost forbidden. I think soon it will be banned to talk about peace in Europe, especially in the EU, or ceasefire. If you sing ceasefire, you might get arrested in Copenhagen sometime soon. And this is really, I'm not exaggerating. In some parts of Europe, you're not allowed to talk about peace, neither in Ukraine nor in Palestine and between Israel and the Palestinians. So this is really a very big civilizational crisis. It has to be dealt with as such. Now, there is, and the reason Hamas, my theory is Hamas did what they did in October the 7th, was that there was an attempt. Oh, sorry, I have to reshare this. Okay, yeah. There was a very big risk of the Palestinian cause and the two-state solution being eliminated from the discussion. The Palestinians felt, and this is Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the greatest existential threat to the existence of Israel right now. It's not Hezbollah or Iran who are the threat, it's Netanyahu. and the right-wing Zionists who are leading the current, onslaught. There has been attempts for a few years, especially with the Trump administration coming to power, eliminating the so-called Palestinian cause and trying to normalize relations between Israel and all the other Arab countries without solving the Palestinian issue. And in the minds of people like Netanyahu, the real idea, and this is it's called the transfer of Palestinians, that there is no Palestine. Jordan is Palestine. So the people in the West Bank should be moved to Jordan where they can establish the Palestinian state, and the people in Gaza should be pushed into the Sinai Desert, and that's it. Recently, in September, Netanyahu in the United Nations General Assembly, he presented this map of the new Middle East. And you can see there's only Israel. There is no Palestinian territories anymore there. So this is his idea, is that there will be no more Palestine and Palestinians. There will be only Israel and its friends in the Arab world. And the Saudi-Israeli negotiations, the risk was that this could lead to a final solution for the Palestinians, where all the Arab countries will become friends with Israel, but there will be no peace. Concerning the Palestinians, there will be no Palestinian state. And I think this triggered what Hamas has done on October the 7th. And also there was also a very real sense of this in Lebanon, Hezbollah and the Iranians, but also the Palestinian Authority. They were screaming. Mahmoud Abbas, he traveled to China, urging the Chinese to launch a new peace conference to revive the negotiations concerning the two-state solution, because the two-state solution was being eliminated completely. And Netanyahu played a key role. Now, another motivation for Netanyahu to continue this war endlessly is because he wants to stay out of prison. This is another reason, because he will be in prison as soon as this war is over, and he is indicted on many counts of corruption. So this is the immediate situation. Now, there are theories. I have heard people talk about, Tom said that actually Hamas, which is part of the Global Muslim Brotherhood, which is a British intelligence creation, where we're helped by the Israeli right wing to rise as a counter gang to the PLO and Yasser Arafat. And this is an old British policy. I can discuss it in the longer term context of these things. But also, the real leadership of Hamas are not in Gaza. They are, and this is one of the weird things that's going on right now. The real leadership, the top leadership of Hamas are in Doha, Qatar, staying in five-star hotels. Qatar, at the same time, is the host for the largest American Air Force base, the Al Aidid Air Force Base. Qatar was a key player in the CIA MI6 wars on Syria, Libya, and they were the spearhead of the whole operation, supporting Al-Qaeda and in collusion with the United States and the British and parts of the European Union. Qatar is also the host of Al Jazeera, which was nothing other than the BBC. I wrote about this many years ago. The BBC Arabic was shut down, moved to Qatar in 1995 for very interesting reasons. But Al Jazeera is the biggest cheerleader for Hamas and the Hamas. But at the same time, they are the strongest allies of the American and British intelligence operations. So there are these weird contexts which make some people think that Hamas did what they did to provoke a regional war in which Iran will be implicated to attack Iran. That's why you have the major mobilization of the U.S. forces in the region. Now, but I think it's more or less that the Palestinians felt that this was a final solution is coming at their doorstep and they had to do something. Now, as you know, this is a general map. Gaza Strip is described as the largest open-air prison. The Israelis left in 1994. but they built walls around it. They built a whole security arrangement behind it, but it's always been also closed from the outside world. The port was destroyed. The airport is closed. The checkpoints to Egypt are controlled by the Israelis. So it's a big prison. It's only 42 kilometers long, and some areas it's only 6 kilometers wide. So life is hell, has been hell for the Palestinians in this in the Gaza Strip, but also for the rest of the West Bank. Now, this is an exaggerated map of the West Bank, and this is the historical background, which I would like to just go back to. In 1916, this whole crisis could be put at the doorsteps of the British Empire. And now the Anglo-American Empire today, who are, the British are the brains and the Americans are the brawn, as Churchill said, the muscles. The British already in 1916, while the First World War was going on, they were orchestrating the division of the whole region, which was under Ottoman control, that after the war, when the Ottomans are defeated, France and Britain and France, they will divide the control over different areas of the so-called Middle East. This was a secret treaty called the Sykes-Picot. Mark Sykes, British representative, and Francois Picot, French representative. That's why it's called Sykes-Picot. It was made in 1916. The Russians were involved. The Tsarist Russia was involved. It was called the Sykes-Picot-Sazonov agreement. But with the Bolshevik Revolution spoiled this whole arrangement in 1917, the Russians withdrew, but they also exposed it publicly. That's why we had revolts in the whole Middle East region. But then in 1917, the Israelis were secretly discussing with the Zionist movement in Britain to establish a homeland for the Jews. Well, they wanted to get rid of the Jews from Europe by moving them into the Palestine. And there was the so-called Balfour Declaration. Arthur Balfour was the state secretary or foreign minister of Britain. He wrote a famous letter to Lord Rothschild, the head of the Zionist organization in Britain, promising that His Majesty's government is intending to build a homeland for the Jews. Now, the war was still going on. So at the same time, the British had promised Sharif Hussein in Mecca, the great-grandfather of the current Jordanian king, that if the Arabs help the British in the fight against the Ottomans in World War II, they will also have the Arab state established. There is a famous correspondence called the Hussein McMahon correspondence. The British viceroy in Cairo was corresponding with Sharif Hussein, but then Sharif Hussein was double-crossed. He was moved into exile. Abdul Aziz bin Saud, the founder of the Saudi kingdom, was brought into power by the British in Saudi Arabia. And then the British created Jordan. They created the Iraqi kingdom, and then the Syrian, but in Syria it didn't work very well. So the British orchestrated this whole scene. And then after World War II, the immigration of Jewish settlers into Palestine, but it accelerated under World War II with the Nazi war and the massive genocide of Jews in Germany and in the rest of Europe. Now, before World War II and during World War II, the British were playing both sides of the conflict. There was a conflict growing up between Arabs in Palestine. Sheikh Amin al-Husseini is a famous figure, and Jews who were armed and trained by the British. So the British were supporting both sides. But eventually, Sheikh Amin al-Husseini, he wanted help from Hitler for his at the end of the. But this was an orchestrated thing. I wrote a long article about that history, how the British were playing all sides in order to, because the British already in Egypt in the beginning of the 20th century, they were promoting the Islamist movement, which became the Muslim Brotherhood, as a counter group to the nationalists in Egypt and in other Arab countries who were against the British Empire. So the Muslim Brotherhood the Islamist movement have been always sympathetic to the British, but are always used in the fight against the nationalists who were fighting for the liberation of their countries in the Middle East against us. So the Muslim Brotherhood, including Hamas, is a creation of intelligence intelligence agencies, the British, but then the United States took over after World War II. But the special relationship between the United States and Britain continues until today to play all these sides. That's why we have such a weird situation where Qatar is a base both for the Americans, for the British, and for Hamas, and doing propaganda for both sides. So this is the historical background that the British created in this region. And then many people don't like to use this map. They say it's a bit misleading. But this whole, from 1948 with the Great Nakba, when the Palestinians were kicked out from most of their villages by Israeli terrorist groups. I don't have time. There is a Zionist grouping, which was, Benjamin Netanyahu's father, Etzion Netanyahu, who's Polish, but he was working as the secretary of Ze'ev Jabotinsky, who was active during World War I, but also after that. And he was a great admirer of Mussolini. He was a real fascist, but of a Zionist revisionist section, who was more pro Mussolini and fascism than the British, because he didn't trust the British. Now, Ze'ev Jabotinsky is from, I think, Odessa in Ukraine. But then he organized these special militias, and we had the Irgun and the Stern gangs. Well, there are different groups. There are the leftist Zionists, like Ben-Gurion, and there's the real right-wing fascist Zionists like Netanyahu today and Jabotinsky before him. Sharon was one of these people. Their idea is the greater Israel, that there will be no Palestinians left in the region, and they have been implementing this policy successively, even after the Oslo Agreement, which I will come to soon. But this is the succession of how the Palestinian land was gradually taken over by settlements and settlers. Now, this is a more realistic picture of how the West Bank is not, as I showed earlier, it's not like one big piece. It's actually many small pieces. But the Israelis have cut off the area in blue from Jordan. So the West Bank is completely isolated except for a small strip with Jericho, but all the border with Jordan is controlled. So this is enormous frustration for the Palestinians, who see that there is no hope for them to have their state, let alone going back to the UN resolutions from the 1947 or the 1967 wars about the two states, with the borders established before 1967 war, the Six-Day War, where the Israelis took over all of the West Bank and Gaza. But there is no hope for the Palestinian people, except to fight. They are given no other choice than doing that. That's why Hamas is more popular than the Palestinian Authority, because Hamas says, well, we have to fight. Look what has happened to us. And therefore, they are able to recruit, but also they are supported by very wealthy Arabs in the Gulf, for example. They're also supported by Iran, and so on and so forth. So this is the real background to the enormous frustration of the Palestinians. Now, the Oslo Agreement, now this is a map of the Oasis Plan presented by Lyndon LaRouche when the Oslo Agreement was signed between the Palestinians and the Arafat in Oslo in at the Rose Garden in Washington, the White House, 1993. But it was, the negotiations were going on earlier. Now, I suspect that the Israelis didn't have, except for Rabin and Shimon Peres personally, did not have the intention to follow through. The Oslo Agreement was basically a way when Iraq went into Kuwait in 1990, the United States and the British, and they mobilized an international coalition to kick out Iraq from Kuwait, which took place in 1991. But the Arab countries were not willing to participate. But there were incentives for the Arab countries to join the United States and Britain in the fight against Iraq. For example, Egypt's debt was canceled at the time of Mubarak, but also that the Palestinian issue will be solved finally if the Arabs join the war against Iraq. So in 1992, after the war, I mean, the Arab countries joined the war. In 1992, we had the Madrid conference, which was the first time they bring together the Arabs and Israelis and with the support of the US administration to start talking about the peace between Israel and the Arabs, but also the Palestinian issue. And the secret negotiations were going on in Oslo. So the Oslo Agreement was some sort of a rewarding the Arabs for having helped destroy Iraq. But the Israeli right wing, as I said, had no intention to follow through the Oslo Agreement. Now, when the Oslo Agreement was announced, Lyndon LaRouche immediately presented his plan, which he had already discussed with the Arabs and Israelis already in the 1970s. 1975 was the first time LaRouche intervened into this region, and a peace process, peace dialogue was sabotaged. LaRouche was involved in it. It was sabotaged personally by Henry Kissinger. But the whole idea was that without economic development, there could be no peace. And therefore, LaRouche said, if you don't put literally the shovels in the ground right now and build the whole area with infrastructure first and foremost, water, power, nuclear power, railways, and so on. If you don't start with that and keep negotiating political things that go back centuries into, old problems, as I mentioned with the British, it will fail. And LaRouche was very strong, issued a very, very strong warning on this. Now, this was not done. The World Bank and IMF went in there and they sabotaged the whole reconstruction idea. So the right wing, the Islamists, they could easily recruit, as Tom was saying, the frustration among the young people, the unemployment, the lack of hope is a very powerful tool to recruit people to violent groups. Now, at the same time, we had the
Excuse me, Hussein?
Sorry.
It's hard to see the map. Can you just describe what the Oasis Plan is?
Okay, well, the basic idea is to bring water, basically, because we have a water shortage problem. So the idea is to build nuclear-powered desalination plants and build water canals that connect the different seas, but use the power to desalinate water for agriculture and industry. At the same time, there should be infrastructure connections, especially from the West Bank to Gaza, to connect the two parts, but also to integrate the whole region into one major, economic development plan. So the idea is, I mean, we have special reports on this from the EIR, but the idea is to build development corridors, use nuclear power for desalination of water, green the desert, basically. That's why it's called the Oasis Plan, greening the whole region, but also using the enormous wealth which is in the larger area, I will show later, as part of that. So the thing is that the economic development plans were not followed through. Then Rabin, who was a military leader, but he finally realized that the existence of Israel will depend on achieving peace with the Palestinians and the Arabs. He was killed. He was killed by a right-wing Israeli Zionist, Yigal Amir. And there were many decrees and fatwas issued by Jewish rabbis to get rid of Rabin, because what he said is very important. He said, we have to change the axioms. All these ideologies which have this greater Israel, all the problems, generated by ideologies. We have to change them to be able to live in peace and build Israel, but also live in peace with our neighbors. He was killed because he was going to change the mindset. And there are many Israelis, of course, the people who demonstrated against Netanyahu recently, they all have the same view, but always the power is in the hands of the right. And that's why this was one of the reasons that the Oslo Agreement was collapsed. Arafat was put under house arrest by a right-wing government, which came after with Sharon. The land of the Palestinians was being taken more and more. Eastern Jerusalem, Arabs were being evacuated from their homes, and Jewish settlers were put in their place. So the whole thing degenerated. Hamas became more and more powerful. It was launching suicide attacks inside Israel, in buses, in restaurants, and so on. So the two sides contributed to killing the Oslo peace agreement. So in 2002, do you see this next slide?
Yes.
Okay. 2002, LaRouche was in Abu Dhabi. He was invited there in a major international economic conference, but it was on the future of the oil and gas in world politics. And you see to the right is actually the energy minister of the United Arab Emirates. And also there are 12 ministers of the Emirates in the audience, but also many energy and other finance ministers of the whole region, Gulf region, were present in this meeting. And he presented this whole idea of how, reviving not only the Oasis Plan, but creating a completely new financial and economic structure for this whole region, and using that region, which is a crossroads of the continents, as a starting point for something much larger. Of course, before that, LaRouche and the Schiller Institute had already presented the Eurasian land bridge, the world land bridge. And then, of course, we have China announcing its own Belt and Road Initiative in 2013. But even before that, the Schiller Institute and LaRouche and Helga were working actively internationally to build this massive project. But this area would be a key element in this whole structure because it's the crossroads of the continents. We have historically, the British have been active there with their geopolitical games, pitting one nation against the other. LaRouche called this region the cockpit fight, the cockfight pit of the global geopolitics. But also this region has not only the geographical location, it has enormous natural wealth, human resources. You have in the Gulf Cooperation Council, sovereign wealth funds. Today, there are $4 trillion of reserves, even bigger than China. These have been historically invested in financial markets in the West. A lot of it was lost in the financial crisis, but these nations now are reorienting towards the East to invest their money, their reserves in building infrastructure, connecting the region, building industries, greening the deserts, working mostly with China on this project. So these ideas, which LaRouche presented already 20 years ago, are resurfacing again, thanks to China, the Belt and Road, but also this new paradigm, which is presented by the BRICS. These nations are not giving up to pressure from the United States, from the EU to abandon Russia and abandon cooperation with Russia. Actually, they have increased their cooperation with Russia, and they're becoming more and more independent. And as I showed in the first picture, there was a prospect of ending the proxy wars, which Iran and Saudi Arabia were different poles in that. The Chinese brokered normalization. So all these elements were coming together. And also when President Xi Jinping was in Saudi Arabia in December last year, he presented an enormous cooperation program with the Gulf countries. It includes not only building infrastructure and industry and greening the desert, it included nuclear technology transfer. It included space cooperation, including training Arab astronauts to visit the Chinese space station, but also Arabs participating in China's lunar program. And they have 30 years agreements with Saudi Arabia, but also with Iran. Both Saudi Arabia and Iran signed comprehensive strategic cooperation agreements with China in December and also in February when the Iranian president went. So this whole region was poised to join the new paradigm. And then suddenly this thing comes into play. I mean, these are some of the old ideas LaRouche presented very, very long time ago. And we also presented this idea of the reconstruction of Syria. We have Operation Phoenix, presented by myself and my colleague Ulf Sandmark, who personally traveled to Syria in the middle of the war in 2015 and 2016. I presented our Operation Phoenix of rebuilding Syria and connecting it to the Silk Road. We also, just a few days ago, we had a delegation in Afghanistan where we presented the Ibn Sina reconstruction miracle of Afghanistan. It's an ongoing work. And also connecting, instead of Afghanistan being a barrier, geopolitical barrier, which was also created by the British, into a bridge between North and South, East and West. We also presented a plan for the reconstruction of Iraq and building development corridors last year to the Iraqi government, including building the green belts in the Iraqi desert. We also presented in 2018 the Operation Felix, the happy miracle of Yemen's reconstruction, which was adopted by the Yemeni Investment Authority. And if there is peace in Yemen, we will see these projects being launched. So anyways, that's basically the third final part of my presentation, which is we have to look at the whole thing in the larger context, the recent context, but also the longer historical context, but also understanding that we have to implement ideas on getting out of the current crisis. And I think the Schiller Institute has been the most creative in the sense of presenting these ideas. We have a record of these initiatives and a very good knowledge of the whole region. And we can help not only the countries in the region, but help the United States and the EU nations design policies for peace and economic development. As I said, we have also the other paradigm, which is China's rise, Asia's rise, the BRICS nations, the Belt and Road. This has to be integrated into the whole larger vision where the United States and the EU can finally play a positive role, which they haven't played for the last 40, 50 years. So I think I stop here and take some questions if possible. I think you are muted.
Oh. No. You have to come here.
Hi.
Here he is.
Oh, hi, Hussein. Thanks a lot. Actually, there's two things which I would like you to address. One thing is that, you know, I had many people who said to me, you know, what is the most heavy thing in the situation in Gaza is how can the Jewish people, how can the Israelis who lived through hell, you know, with the concentration camps in Germany, how can these people do the same to other people? So if you can address that, what is wrong with their axioms? What is going on here? You know, and then on the other thing is, you know, I fear that this is going to be made to a war of religion, which it is not. So I just, yeah, there's two things.
Yeah, I think there are two, as I said, there are two groupings in Israel today. You have the extreme right-wing guys, Netanyahu, Sharon, Jabotinskyites, and other religious leaders backing them. They have a chauvinist idea, a racist idea, that they are the chosen people. God chose them. I don't know which of the gods they're talking about, but they say our God has chosen us as we are special. We have a covenant with God. He promised us to be special. Everybody else is below us. And Arabs are not only below, they are subhuman. So it's easier. It's like what the Nazis did is they dehumanized the Jews first by humiliating them, making jokes about them, making conspiracies about them, spreading both ridicule and hatred. So it's easier if you dehumanize, you take the human character out of the person, it's easier for you to kill that person. It's nothing personal anymore. It doesn't hurt to kill, whether they're women, children, men, doesn't matter. They are subhuman. And this is the problem with Netanyahu type. The other group, of course, as I said, there are people like Rabin, but even much better than Rabin, you have the whole peace camp. But those people were out demonstrating against Netanyahu recently, like by hundreds of thousands. These are the people who tried to bring Netanyahu into the court and into prison. The problem is that when you have Israel being attacked, like previously with the suicide attacks by Hamas, or now with this threat, the Israelis tend to unite because they are such a small group in the middle of such a huge Arab group. So this construction is, it makes it, people have to say, okay, it's our survival. Depends on this. So what you have to keep your mouth shut. It's war. You can't protest. All the protests disappeared from Israel because they say, so even the good people, they have to take a back seat and stay out of the streets until this thing is over. We have seen this time and again. So I'm not an expert on Jewish history or Jewish people or religion, but I think this is what I have seen happen time and again. And I questioned on the religious war. I don't believe there is this is not really a religious war. I mean, the religion is being used by both the Likud, the right-wing extremists in Israel, and Hamas. But it's really a geopolitical tool. As I said, the British were very good in, unfortunately, very good in using religion and religious people to manipulate them into eternal conflicts. Because if you, according to Hamas's ideology, this war can never end. One of the sides have to be eliminated. The Likud and the right wing in Israel also have this. One of the two parties have to be eliminated. So this is a recipe for never-ending wars, and this is geopolitically manipulated. You have the United States have a hand in this, the British have a hand in this, and unfortunately now the EU is being pulled into this ridiculous game, like they have been pulled into the Ukraine game, and it's very, very self-destructive. But it has nothing to do with religion.
There is an internal Israeli opposition even now. One of the leading newspapers, Haaretz, has been consistently coming out against the war policy. There are others, but the real factor is going to be both, the way I see it, of how we change the situation. There's three factors. One is growing opposition inside Israel. The second is European nations who are now starting to defect from the pro-war policy with recent statements by the Belgian government. The French government has been calling for ceasefire now. But the main thing is opposition inside the United States. And our role in the Schiller Institute and the International Peace Coalition for promoting the opposition in the United States to the policy which Biden is pursuing. And there's a growing resistance and opposition, including from Jewish peace organizations, but it's not enough so far. So I just wanted to say that. And otherwise, just if you can say something more, if you have a comment about that, but also if you can say something more about that in the Oslo agreements, there was an economic aspect, which was very important, and we were supporting, and it was not well known, but there was this, and then unfortunately it got sabotaged also by the IMF. But if you can say more about that.
Yeah, well, I think the International Peace Coalition, a brilliant idea launched by Lyndon LaRouche, the chairman of the Schiller Institute, is a fantastic idea. It's a very good platform because it's not only that we have to stop the wars, we have to replace the war policy with something positive, an idea of peace through economic development on a global scale. But this also will imply a dialogue of civilizations, which Helge has been pushing for a very long time. So the International Peace Coalition is not a simple peace movement to stop the war, but to build something, build a better world, using all these ideas, which I presented as part of them, but also the ideas of a cultural renaissance in the West and a dialogue of civilizations between a better culture in the West and the Asian cultures and the Muslim culture and so on and so forth. So this would be the more long-term basis for peace, rather than just signing a ceasefire agreement, because all these problems I described will come back and haunt us again. The same people will conspire again to launch new wars. So I think everybody should join the International Peace Coalition and the Schiller Institute, because there you have the long-term solution for all these problems. The question of the Oslo Agreement, yes, there was an economic part, economic reconstruction part of that, including the integration of West Bank and Gaza, building a highway. They were building a port in Gaza, airport, and so on and so forth. But all this was undermined by all the political talk about the final settlement, about the settlements, about the refugees, the Palestinian refugees who have been in the diaspora, they're by the millions, if they will be back. All these things were used. But then in EIR, we very, very clearly specified how the World Bank and IMF got into the economic part of the Oslo Agreement and destroyed it. For example, one of the things they were pushing, instead of building infrastructure, agriculture, and industry, they were pushing tourism in the Holy Land for the Palestinians and the Jews, that this is what the moneymaker. If you have peace, the tourists will come, they will buy your souvenirs, they will buy your hummus and falafel, and you will become rich by that. That was the World Bank recipe for economic development of the Palestinians and in Israel. There are no industries, no nuclear power, no infrastructure, nothing. So there was a very good aspect of the Oslo Agreement, but it was handed over to the World Bank and IMF instead of the Israelis and the Arabs themselves working on it. And also adding some of the ideas which we have, because they didn't talk about nuclear power. LaRouche talked about nuclear power. Also, there was this idea of building the canals from the Dead Sea to the Red Sea to the Dead Sea, but also from the Dead Sea to the Mediterranean, using that also for power generation, because there's a difference in the alleviation, but also for transport, and so on and so forth. So there were many good ideas, but they were not catalyzed in one policy like the Oasis Plan was. I have 10 minutes left.
Okay. One more thing is, can you say something about this? Because, there was this information, just around this, before the attack, or around, when the attack happened, this, that the weapons which the West gave to Ukraine, many of them went to Israel. So, what is going on? Is there something? Did the Americans already begin to arm the Israelis to do this?
Well, historically, Israel is well armed by the United States. They don't need weapons from Ukraine. The weapons from Ukraine, they go to clandestine operations, special operations. They're not like government-to-government things. They disappear from Ukraine and then they find their ways to conflict areas. Israel has all the weapons at its disposal. It wishes at its disposal from the United States. There's now a direct U.S. involvement in the war in Gaza, providing intelligence, providing the bombs and all kinds of technologies. So I'm not aware of any weapons from Ukraine going to Israel, but I know that the weapons from Ukraine are sold in the black market into all kinds of conflict areas around the world.
Do you have any more detailed suggestions what people can do?
Well, I think one of the things we should not give up on is to talk about peace and ceasefire publicly and mobilize people. But I think it's, as I said, although the Schiller Institute is a smaller group compared to others, I think the Schiller Institute has the potential, with the idea of the International Peace Coalition, as I mentioned, to catalyze a much larger movement in Europe and in the United States to come up not only with how to stop this war, but also to bring in the economic, cultural aspects of establishing a long-standing peace policy.
I also, it's also, I mean, unfortunately, what we see in Gaza right now, the injustice against the Palestinians, is hopefully the last in the row of all of these permanent wars going on and going on. One war to the next war to the next war. These famous words of Madeleine Albright, that she was asked, well, what about the US campaigns against Iraq? It costed the lives of 500,000 Iraqi children. What do you have to say about that? And she answered, I think it was the price worth paying. I mean, just so hopefully what we see that this is the end of this terrible, terrible policy that's been going on for a long, long time. And it could keep going because nobody would say no, because everybody was scared about going against the powers that be with the United States. Nobody is scared of Israel. They're scared of the United States. You know, it's the big brother coming in every time Israel is doing something, you know, and if somebody says, now it's enough, then comes big brother and says, no, 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 you can't touch my little brother here. But the point is, we're in a different world now. This is what this whole shift with the BRICS is going on. I mean, also, what is it, in 10 days, there's going to be elections in Argentina. A very important election, because what is the election of Argentina all about? It's about, will you have a government where Argentina joins the BRICS or not? And in all of these surroundings, you have this fight, which is, one thing is the present urgent crisis, which is terrible, 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 but which also can evolve into a big war. But all of this is still a part of this other picture, which is the transformation of planet Earth from one defect political paradigm, from one defect system to something else. And the US, seemingly all-powerful, is not all-powerful. The US can put these aircraft carriers in the Middle East, but what can they do? They're sitting ducks. They're waiting to be sunk, basically. They can't do anything militarily. If this really go bad, then Israel has a big problem, because if Turkey moves in, or if, you know, any of all, even if Egypt is really mobilized, Israel will have terrible, terrible problems, and the United States won't really have much they can do. It's not like the US has. We've seen what the United States can do militarily in a certain sense in Ukraine, or what NATO to do, the collective West. So we are in, so the thing is, somehow, the recognition that the game is up, that we are at the end of the road. This is now being said about Ukraine, you know. Ukraine is at the end of the road. They've done what they could. The counter-offensive has failed. The weapons, all of the weapons NATO have, they gave to Ukraine. They have wasted them all. And there's nothing more they can do. But they can't even mobilize an army because they're all there. So that's being said. But the bigger issue here, in a certain sense, I think, which has to be addressed in our part of the world is, it's not just Ukraine that's the end of the road. This whole Western military policy, this idea by brutal force, by military might, because the United States is spending so much money on it, we can somehow dominate and change the world. And that has been proven that that is also at the end of the road. Then the big question is, can we then put what Hussein has been put on the table in there instead? So Hussein, you have to go, but do you have some final words?
I think as you tried to explain, I mean, this whole situation is exposing not only Israel, but also exposing the whole US, British, and EU. Not only that they are incapable of solving any problems practically, that they are actually very dangerous, but also this whole, double standard, that there are different standards that are applied to different countries and different people. This hypocrisy has been exposed to everyone around the world. And the EU, especially the US has lost many friends a long time ago. The EU is losing the majority of humanity because of their stance in this conflict. Instead of at least staying neutral, calling for peace, they are pouring fuel on the fire. So the United States and the EU are in their weakest point right now, which makes them dangerous. But at the same time, a change from within the United States and Europe becomes even more possible. And this situation has catalyzed an enormous force we saw in the streets, but also there is an underground resentment of this policy inside the EU, inside the United States, which can turn things into a positive direction. But the important thing is, of course, we have to keep our moral standard at the very high level, but also our mobilization capabilities to organize people, to mobilize people for the ideas that can sustain peace on a global level. It's a very deep issue. I mean, we have had this cultural paradigm, the countercultural revolution since the 1960s. It's not easy to tackle, but we have to start pointing at that moral cultural paradigm shift, which has taken place in the United States and in Europe since the 60s, which is one of the big problems that we have in dealing with solving problems today. But I think it's a very, very open situation for change. And the people who, I'd say the leadership of the EU and the United States have been exposed as the hypocrites, but also they are very weak. They are incapable of even militarily solving problems. They just make things worse by their interventions. And therefore, the forces can come forward with ideas, with mobilization, and shift the whole situation here on the ground.
And maybe also you see, as in Europe right now and in the United States, that more and more it's becoming too much for a lot of circles, saying even split within Europe. I mean, nations being caught that we cannot really stand up for this. We have to speak out against this. And I think we will see a bigger divide also when it comes into generations. That those that say that there's a certain, I've heard this also from the US, that you have the older generation saying, but we have to stand by Israel no matter what because of the past. And then especially among, say, under 30, people say, I don't get this. Why are the Israelis different from they don't simply accept that that's the way it has to be. So as this begins to have consequences, also economic consequences. I mean, even in Israel, it's not a free thing to go to war. It has devastating effects. You take, what, 200-300 reservists out of the economy because they have to go to war. They can't go to their jobs. It has tremendous consequences. And people are dying. The Israelis even, they're dying. You know, these soldiers are not invincible. So you have this, somehow this comes into play. And will have a lot of young people, especially, I think, questioning this. And then, of course, it's absolutely decisive that there are people like us, people like you, Hussein, who can be a voice of reason, who, I mean, again, the whole Israeli thing right now, the whole Israeli reaction is that, you know, contemplated, this is the way we're going to create a better future for Israel. No, it's emotion. We feel enraged, we do this, but there's no idea of what the future will be like. So if we can provide that, I think there will be a lot, especially also in the youth, that is actually, you know, that want that.
Thank you.
So thank you, Hussein.
Thank you very much for having me. Okay, bye-bye.
Jens Jørgen, vi vil gerne have, at du også siger noget. Skal vi tage en kort pause først?
Ja.